Welcome to the Sober Nation FM podcast, where we're putting recovery on the map. I'm your host, Jonathan Sylvester. This show is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Do you want to take your recovery to the next level? Do you want more support, community, and fellowship? Sobriety Engine is an incredible free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. You can get a ton of great tips, resources, and guidance to help you succeed in recovery and in life. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. Sober Nation FM is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle, all while supporting your sobriety, then you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends. Follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Nation, let's hop right into today's episode. Today, I'll be speaking with author Maggie King. Thanks for coming on the show, Maggie.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I want to hear more about your book, Pregame. But first, I'd like to start off by hearing about what your life was like before finding sobriety. So where does your relationship with addiction actually start?
So my relationship with addiction starts probably when I was like 12 or 13, when I, started to notice like members of my family who would, drink alcohol and get a little bit messy, and I started to think like, maybe the whole drugs and alcohol thing is not for me. Like I had friends that were starting to kind of experiment, but I just didn't want to, be like the members of my family that I, had been observing. And so for a while I was kind of like a prude about it and was like, no, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to do any of that. And, basically a large part of why I broke from that mindset was because I really wanted to fit in. I wanted to be like all the other girls who could go to parties and drink and, meet boys and things like that. But I was a closeted queer kid when I was 12, 13, 14. So, knowing that I was gay and knowing that I was going to have to, fit in and like have some sort of boyfriend or something, I was like, I'll have a drink so that I can talk to this guy.
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Like I'll try it. Let me loosen up.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like a big factor, my, closeted sexuality in starting to drink. So when I was 16, I had my first drink. I don't remember what it was or where it was, but I know that I'd grown up having a lot of anxiety and feeling, not enough. And really, I went to a very high achieving school. And so I had a lot of pressure that I put on myself. And alcohol just completely had all of those thoughts, like just out the window. Alcohol, the second that it got into my lips, like I was fine. And I hadn't ever just felt like okay, like in my own skin before. So when I had that feeling with alcohol, like I wanted it all the time. And from the jump, like I was a blackout drinker, like 16 years old, not even 100 pounds. I'm 5'2". I'm taking antidepressants and I'm drinking a fifth of vodka every time that I go drinking. And I knew that it was abnormal. My friends didn't like hanging out with me because they'd always have to drag me home, call my parents to pick me up.
Yeah.
I was a blackout, passed out drinker. And, that continued throughout high school. I also, became somewhat of a stoner in high school. I had, a boyfriend at the time who, him and his friends that I hung out with, like that was their thing. And so I picked it up, and I really was like the kid that would work really hard and had the good like resume and like face on the outside. But then like on the weekend, I'm trashing someone's basement and like I'm the only girl there. And, everyone is just like, what are we going to do with the girl that's passed out on the floor? So, I got away with a lot of stuff during those first couple of years.
Yeah.
My parents tried to ground me and I always kind of got out of it.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a lot of consequences like they talk about in recovery. But really, I think where my addiction like took a real turn into like that daily drinking, that, that compulsive behavior,
Right.
Was when I got to college. I had graduated high school. I was recruited to play field hockey at a liberal arts college in Massachusetts, Wellesley College. And I'd stopped smoking weed because I was like, they're going to drug test me when I get to this field hockey team. But they didn't because it's D3. But either way, I like had quit smoking and I basically got to college and was like, I'm just going to binge drink on the weekends, go down to the frats. And like, I would be the chick that had the bottle, like the plastic water bottle that looked like it was full of water, but it was just vodka.
Yeah.
Like on the way there, pre-gaming on like the way to the frat. And then I got in there and I had another water bottle, so I didn't have to like buy drinks at the frat. And like, it was a whole process. And I think you probably can relate to that, like addict math, where it's like, okay, if I pregame with this amount of drinks, I'll be right where I need to be when I get there.
Yeah.
And then once I get there, like I'm already set.
Well, my problem was I always sucked at math. So I just didn't even do any math. It was just like, I'm having this and then I'll have that. And then whatever happens is kind of where I end up.
At one point I tried doing like the Sharpie thing on your wrist, like trying to count drinks. And I would always lose track at 10.
Mm-hmm.
like I would get to 10 and be like, this isn't normal. I might as well just drink the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like I got to college, I was really doing that like weekend warrior thing. And you know, I had an experience the summer before I got to college where I was sexually assaulted by 2 childhood friends. And I know that this is a very common narrative for women in recovery. And so this is why I talk about it, so that other women in the program or in recovery know that, you know, they're not alone. And, you know, trauma is like, PTSD is a crazy thing in that it just like kind of blocks you off from your memories sometimes. And so when I got to college, it was like, in my subconscious, I obviously like recognized when it happened, but then I kind of just was like, I'm about to go like start my whole new life in college. I'm just going to put that in my subconscious. Maybe we'll come back to it later.
Yeah.
And so, I'll try to hurry up because this is like a long-winded story.
Good.
But,
you're good.
You know, basically I'm playing field hockey. I'm at a fancy liberal arts college. I'm like top of my game. Okay. I break my thumb in a field hockey game. I do get surgery. And you know, it's a thumb, right? It's not a very major surgery. It's just putting some pins in your finger and hoping.
Loaded you up with pills.
Oh yeah. They were like, here's a script for 30 Oxycontin.
Oh wow. Yeah. Completely necessary.
For a thumb. Yeah. And my parents were like, can I curse on this podcast?
Yes.
My parents were like, fuck that. Yeah. We're not going to let our child take Oxy. Like, we know that that's not a good idea. So my doctors were smart and they were like, well, we'll prescribe her something called tramadol, which is not addictive. And, you know, I know, and probably you know, that tramadol is still a narcotic and still an opiate, it's just synthetic. So, you know, I was laying in bed, taking my pills, no problems whatsoever. And then
couldn't even feel your thumbs. Didn't even know you had thumbs.
No. Who needs thumbs when you're high as fuck? Like,
right.
I'm laying in bed, I'm watching Scandal on Netflix. I'm not going to class. Like, it's a thumb. I can go to class.
Right. Yeah.
But you know, being on those pills, like, you know, reminded me how much I love getting high. And so I started you know, using like smoking weed again because I wasn't playing field hockey. And now I'm smoking and I'm drinking and I don't have any responsibility to this team. So I don't have to really, you know, cover my ass anymore. And then all of my flashbacks, my PTSD memories and flashbacks of my assault came back. And so that's when I kind of started doing the all day, every day thing with using and drinking. And so I stopped going to class. I, you know, would either be drunk, asleep, or high because I just couldn't deal with the emotional pain of what I was going through. And so ultimately, how I ended up getting sober was that after a month of this, I was ready to hang it up. Like I really was, you know, figuring out what was going to be the best plan to kill myself, what was going to be the quickest and easiest way. And I found myself on the roof of my college counseling building, which I think is kind of ironic.
Wow.
And, you know, I got up there and I was on the roof and I was on the ledge and I was there to jump. And I felt a shoulder touch me on the back, you know, from the back. And I turned around, there's no one on the roof with me.
Wow.
And I felt like I need to get down and I need to ask for help and I need to ask someone to help me. And so my poor freshman year roommate, I like came back to our dorm room and was like, listen, I'm going to kill myself. So I don't know if you want to help me or not, but I just thought I'd say it. And, you know, she's from North Carolina. She's a really nice girl, but she was like, I don't know what to do for you. So I called my mom and she drove all the way up to Boston to come get me. And yeah, that's really what it was like before I got sober.
Wow. Good for you. Number one, you know, just thank you for being open about, you know, your sexual abuse that you endured. And I'll just say, like, I think this is important to throw out there too, not to dismiss or downplay you sharing that, or women suffering that. But I mean, I can't tell you, number one, we've had a few men on the show share the same thing, and how many guys I've talked to
Yeah.
that. So I'm saying that to say, like, when we're talking about trauma and we're talking about sexual abuse, it is all around.
Yeah. And I
And
didn't really realize that there were so many men who had that same
oh,
experience
for
until I
sure.
got to AA, because
Hmm.
in like, recovery spaces, like it's honesty all the time. And
Yeah.
so people feel comfortable sharing that. And I'm so glad that other men, feel like they can say that out loud in a group.
Mm. The other thing I was going to say is, and obviously good for you for not, jumping off that building, but for asking for help. I was just watching this video yesterday, and gosh, it was so powerful. I just got to bring it up. It was about this guy that jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and
That public
survived.
speaker,
Yeah, yeah.
heaven something.
Yeah. And as soon as he jumped, he regretted it,
Yeah.
but he survived. But anyway, I mean, what an amazing thing. And that, yeah, I mean, that doesn't sound like nothing, the tap you felt on the shoulder.
Yeah.
Um, so that's pretty amazing. So you just mentioned AA. So I'm guessing at some point you get involved. Do you go to treatment? Do you just start going to meetings? Like, how do you get into this?
So even though I did ask for help, I still prided myself in having it together. Like I
Yeah,
thought, like,
of
I'm not
course.
that bad. Like it's not
Yeah.
that bad. I still have it under control. Like I was just delusional.
Hmm.
And so once my mom came and got me, bless her heart, like came 6 hours from Philly to Boston to pick me up. I'm 18 years old. Like I'm still a kid, like I really don't know a lot about how to take care of myself. So I needed my mom. And so she came and got me and took me to my, therapist that I had seen in high school. And she was like, look, we're either going to send you to rehab, we're going to send you to the psych ward, or we're going to send you to like an IOP, like outpatient,
Okay.
program.
Yeah.
And I'm 18, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a manipulative, brat. Like I was like, I'm not doing any of that. I don't
Hmm.
want to go, stay in an inpatient facility. I'm not crazy. I'm just, I just don't really want to live anymore. Like it's fine. Like let's not lock me up
Yeah.
anywhere.
Let's not overreact to me
Right.
almost jumping off the building.
Right. I'm crazy.
Mm.
So basically, my therapist was like, that's fine, but you have to like go to these AA meetings.
Okay.
And the first one that I went to, typical in a church basement, and I had a lot of misconceptions about addicts and alcoholics and people in recovery. And so like, I got there and I'm a smart ass, so I raised my hand and I was like, I'm not really supposed to be here. I'm not like you people. I go to a fancy college and I play on a field hockey team, but like I tried to kill myself and that's why I'm here. And they were all like, you're in the right place. And I was like, I'm not like you people. And this guy came up to me after the meeting and he looked like what I thought an alcoholic would look like, which is like, you know, like looks like someone who maybe lives outside, like, just kind of like a very rough looking guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he came up to me and was like, listen, I was a D1 baseball player and I've been living in the park for 6 months. And I was like, all
Wow.
right, thank you for that slice of humble pie. I will see you tomorrow at the
Hmm.
same meeting. Like I realized like maybe I am like these people. And if he hadn't said that to me, I don't know if I would have gone to another meeting.
Wow.
And yeah, so I found a great like clubhouse basically in Glenside, Pennsylvania, which is 15 minutes from my house, and meetings all day long. But I specifically was going to the women's meetings so that I could connect with other women and feel comfortable sharing about the things that I, was really going through. And after a while, like, you know, I really appreciated being able to get out of the house and go to those meetings.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was doing that for 2 months, and then I came back to school. I had been on academic probation. I had to finish up my last semester, and then I was starting a new one. And I ended up finding a really great young people's meeting, other kids who were in college and getting sober in Boston. And so that really saved my life the first year for sure.
Yeah. Man, I bet. And Yeah, it was super helpful. Number one, like you said, for just to hear that, because I had those same misconceptions and just like preconceived notions about what recovery was, what 12-step programs were all about. I probably said 100 times on the show, like in my mind, it's a cult, it's
Yes.
brainwashing.
Yes.
But when I realized, like, I don't know that I had a specific situation. Maybe I did. I honestly, just where my mind was at the time, like, it's all kind of a blur now. But
Right.
but I do remember hearing other people tell my story,
Mm.
and I remember when that really clicked for the first time, kind of like that guy coming up to you. Someone definitely. There were people that shared things that I was like, wow, that's okay. Maybe there's something here.
And that's a really powerful experience,
Yeah,
especially for people who, like me, felt that sense of like, I don't want to live anymore. No one's ever
mm,
going to understand what I'm going through. To
yeah,
hear someone say exactly how you're feeling is like this very, like, honestly, like special and sacred kind of thing that I feel like I've experienced in AA. And to your point, like, if AA is a cult, that's fine. I'm a cult member. You know what I'm saying? Like, if it helps me, like, I don't care if it's a cult. That's what I
yeah,
say to all my sponsees. I'm like, I don't care if you think that this is like a cult,
right.
because if it works for you, then great. Welcome to the cult, you know?
Yeah. Well, and that's so, I mean, you kind of took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, I thought it was brainwashing, but what I started to think is, and like, so my first sponsor, he would just tell me, like, I don't know that I'd be bitching or complaining about anything, but like I'd kind of be explaining like my line of thinking for making a decision or thinking about a decision. And you just say, your thinking is an error. And I started seeing that like the way I was thinking was just so off base, and so really I needed and this is really what recovery is anyway, right? And like learning about how to take care of ourselves and new behaviors. Call it what you will, it's rewiring our brains, right? And
Right.
I needed some of that. So let me ask you, so you found these young people meetings. I think that's so cool. um Early on, what was maybe the biggest thing that you think you struggled with, like, as you were getting sober?
I think I have a really hard time. Like, people will say in the rooms, like, you can't be too dumb for this program, but you
Hmm,
can be too smart. And like that is
yeah.
my problem, because I think that the world revolves around me. I really do. And like, I didn't realize that until I
Mm,
had women in AA point that out to me. I have a amazing sponsor who, when she was in prison, they nicknamed her Perspective, because she, like, what she was reading the big book in jail, and like, she would have like all of these things to say. And so basically, like, I call her when I'm like freaking out because I can't control something. I feel like, I'm not in charge. I feel like I'm not getting what I want. And I call her and she says, Maggie, the world does not revolve around you. And
mhm.
I need that, because I think that there's part of me that really does think that it does.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I mean, and I know, when some people that aren't in 12-step programs, like when they hear stuff like that, everyone needs something different, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's like one of the cool things about recovery, whether you're in a 12-step program or not, you can kind of figure out like who you click with, like kind of what you need. And I definitely needed and still need like people around me to be just fucking real with me and
Yes.
direct with me. And because kind of like you were saying, and not to say I'm just the smartest guy in the world, but one of the things I'm so grateful for is that, I've heard people just describe it as like flipping the stupid switch. Like, I just stopped like questioning everything and acting like I knew everything. And that was such a big deal for me. But yeah, I definitely, like, especially early on, just needed people to like really to tell me what to do. I didn't know, like, I didn't know how to function
Yeah.
sober. And I really needed people to like help guide me and just give me basic, direction with stuff. So I completely understand that. I like that. I mean, perspective. I mean, because that's really, I think that's what having a sponsor is about a lot of the times. Um, Okay. So yeah, I get that. Now I'd like to hear more about your book, which is titled Pregame: Alcohol Addiction and Recovery Through the Eyes of a College Student. So why did you decide to write the book? Like, how did you make the decision to get started and write this?
So it was kind of like it was a weird, the way it started is kind of crazy because basically there was a girl at my school who had written a book, and
Mhm.
she was holding like kind of like an office hour type of thing at
Okay.
like one of our cafes and was like, "Hey, come talk to me about how I wrote a book." And I was like, "I'd go. Like, sure, I'll go. I have nothing better to do." And I was like maybe 4 months sober. And she had gone through this program that's led by a Georgetown professor, um, where basically like he teaches undergrads and now graduates and others to become an expert in what you would want to do with your life career wise, and then like write about that.
Oh, that's cool.
And so, basically, I contacted this guy. His name's Professor Eric Custer at Georgetown. And I called him and I was like, "I'm interested in your program, but I'm like 4 months sober and I don't feel like I have any like authority to write a book. However, I have a story to tell, but also I'm like totally into policy. I'm a political science major at Wellesley. And so I started when I got sober, started to research addiction, started to realize like there are so many policy flaws
Mm.
that are contributing to people not being able to get the services that they need when they're ready, et cetera, whatever. Um, and he was like, "Call me in August, and if you change your mind, we'll do it."
Mm.
And basically, when I called him in August, he said, "Your story's not out there. There's no one really that has talked about, getting sober in college from the perspective of someone who is still in college. Like people talk
Yeah,
about getting sober at 18, 19, 20, what
sure.
have you, but
Hmm.
they're not in college when
That's
they're
true.
talking about it."
Yeah.
So, like, the story that I had been looking for to cling on to so that I didn't feel so alone was my story. So I had to put it out there. And then I also, because I'm a nerd, had all this research about, criminal justice reform and drug court and like, you know, PTSD and all these different things that fall into the addiction like conversation. And so what ended up happening is that, I wrote partially a memoir. Um, and then also it's partially like some commentary on policy. And I think that a lot of people expect that it's going to be a full memoir, but like I don't need to put my whole life into a book. I just wanted to put enough so that I had the credibility of saying like I'm interested in this topic because it affects me on a daily
Mhm.
basis.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, and like you said, too, because you probably would have benefited from seeing your story at some point too, right? And
Exactly.
I think that is like that's immediately. I mean, it's and I like that you put it right in the title, like, hey, I'm still in college,
Yeah.
as this is going on. So, so that's pretty awesome. I do want to ask. I want to come back to the policy and stuff. I want to hear from you on that in just a second. But so far, what would you say is kind of like the biggest lesson you've learned in your recovery?
I think, I really had to come to learn that alcohol is not my problem. Neither are drugs. Like they're not my problem. Like they cause problems in my life because
Mhm.
I'm not good at drinking, right? Like I think that I'm good at drinking because I can drink a lot, but I'm not actually good at drinking.
Right.
Um, like I had to realize like the reason that I drink, it's a coping mechanism first and foremost. Like I'm not saying that I don't believe that addiction is a disease. Like I do follow that logic. However, for me, I see it mostly as a coping mechanism, a survival tool that I learned to deal with, anxiety, depression, feeling left out, what have you.
Hmm.
Um, and so what I really learned, like the biggest lesson is that this is not a program, at least the program that I'm in, that teaches you how to get sober. It teaches you how to get okay with yourself so that you don't have to drink to hide from yourself anymore. Because that's really what I was doing. I was just burying myself in alcohol and drugs, praying that none of it would explode.
Yeah.
And it did anyway. So,
Hmm.
that just didn't work for me. And I say all the time to people, like, abstinence worked for me. I'm a firm believer in harm reduction. And like if using drugs or drinking like helps you cope with whatever you're going through and that works for you, like by all means, please continue using that coping mechanism. It
Hmm.
stopped working for me. That's why I got sober. I needed a
Yeah.
different solution. And I
Yeah.
found that in a program like AA.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you were talking about math earlier, and gosh, I never counted maybe I planned on taking like a certain, because I ended up, down the line, taking pain pills and stuff like that. Maybe I would plan on like taking a certain amount in a day or something, but beyond that, there was no counting or anything. Um, the equations I did do were like, how can I stay like quasi sober? Like I'm not going to do pain pills, but I'll get like super drunk, smoke a little weed,
Yep.
and it just never worked out because see, my thing was it took me so long to realize this is that although I personally like wasn't a huge fan of drinking, I would drink if it was there. The reason it was a problem for me is because number one, I couldn't control it. But it always led back to the drugs.
Yeah.
Like
I
there
always
was,
say I always say at the bottom of my glass is my dealer's phone number.
yeah,
Like one leads to the other.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there were pain pills at the bottom of that glass every single time. Now, I do want to get into policy, and you just mentioned harm reduction. My thinking my thinking has changed a lot on this over the years, and I'll tell you why. Number one, just like from a personal perspective. um so I one okay initially when I got introduced to recovery, or like when I kind of started down that road, I started, the first thing I ever did is I entered a study for Suboxone
Nice.
before it was even like on the market. And I went and like talked to a therapist, and they didn't recommend, and look, I'm not blaming them. I probably wouldn't have gone. They didn't recommend like 12 steps or any like other recovery stuff or anything like that. And basically I just took the Suboxone long enough to like, you know, uh, get paid for the study and then like, move on. And so I did that a couple other times, like other outpatients. I would go, I would get the Suboxone. Now I know there's people like that might be listening to this that have struggled with like just Suboxone. Like, thankfully, I never liked it. Like, it wasn't something that I wanted to abuse or anything. I thought it had a lot of weird side effects. But, um, when I first got like after having a little while sober, like, and people started talking about harm reduction more, like initially I was like, well, how are you sober if you're, doing XYZ? And like I totally forgot that, like, hey dude, like, by the way, you were, that's kind of how you got into recovery. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a tough thing, right? Like I really want to hear your take on this. Like I go back and forth because it's like, it's still a mind altering substance. But like for me, I think this is the way it's supposed to work, right? It's the way it worked for me. Like, hey, this is going to keep you alive
Yeah.
and around long enough that hopefully like a seed of recovery gets planted, and then hopefully one day you can get off of it. But then unfortunately there's people that are just like on this shit forever, right? So talk to me about this a little bit, like just kind of like your view on harm reduction.
Yeah, I could talk about this for like an hour or two, but
You got 2
I'll,
minutes.
I'll
No, I'm
keep it
just
to
kidding.
two. No, so I grew up in Philadelphia, and
Yeah.
we have one of the largest open air markets for
Yeah.
narcotics.
Yeah.
So Philadelphia is just completely overrun with overdoses. And so when I got sober, I wanted to get involved in the community, and I wanted to learn more about the opiate crisis, because while I don't call myself an opiate addict, I did have experience with that and how easy it is for someone to get their hands on prescribed narcotics. And
Hmm.
so I did a lot of research and I was learning, and I ended up, meeting a lot of people through recovery, but also joining some like nonprofits and having internships and learning about harm reduction. Specifically, last summer, I was running a naloxone distribution. Naloxone, for anyone who doesn't know, is listening, it's also known as Narcan. It's an overdose reversal medication. Um, and I was running this distribution program across the state of Pennsylvania, and we ended up sending like 1,700 doses of Narcan
Wow.
across the state. So I learned a lot from the people that I worked with at that time.
Sure.
And like I will tell you that I think that most people in recovery, like especially those who weren't necessarily um like taking advantage of those harm reduction services. Like for me, like I have never been to a harm reduction place other than to volunteer because I was not an IV drug user. So I didn't
Mhm.
need to go to like a syringe service program. But I wanted to learn more. And, with the Suboxone, like there are a lot of people who are like old timer, like 12 step people who are like abstinence is the only way.
Right.
And like what I will remind everyone who's listening who maybe is still kind of on the fence about Suboxone and other harm reduction strategies such as Narcan and clean needles, um, you know, there are plenty of places in this country who still teach that abstinence is the best way to practice sex, right?
Mhm.
So, um, what I would remind everyone that we interact with harm reduction every day. Your seatbelt is to reduce harm. Your wearing a condom is to reduce, harm in having pregnancy or STDs, whatnot. Like a helmet when you're on your bike. These are all forms of harm reduction. And I'd also, with the Suboxone and Vivitrol and all those different methadone, um, all the different medicated assisted treatments, you know, I'm on antidepressants, right? And I changed my antidepressant recently. And they didn't just tell me, you got to quit cold turkey, right? Like I
Right.
had a tolerance to those things. And so I had
Right.
to slowly taper off of it. And
Mhm.
that's kind of how I think of Suboxone in terms of people who are addicted to opiates. Like you kind of have to be tapered down. You can't just go cold turkey. Like you might actually die from withdrawal
Yeah.
if they don't do it gradually, especially if you've been using for a long time and in large quantities. And so
Mhm.
I have plenty of friends who are on Suboxone. They feel really good about it. Most of them because they have a doctor that's very attentive and checks in with them regularly. I feel that when people are, you know, using Suboxone and don't necessarily have a lot of supports, it can be hard. I mean, some people can do it from what I've heard, but it's nice to have that support and someone to check in with. And some people stay on it for years, and I think that that's fine. Like as long as you're able to function and like have the life that you want to have, like that's fine. And
Yeah.
like I said before, like I I don't think that abstinence is the only way to recovery. I have plenty of friends who are like, I don't do heroin anymore, but like I'll have a glass of wine at dinner, and I'm like, good for
Mhm.
you. If you can do that, that's great. I can't, but love that for you and your journey.
Yeah.
So I mean, harm reduction is like this huge field of different strategies and conversations and theories. And like I think that people need to ease into the idea that like doing drugs is not a bad thing. Just the general population needs to understand that just because someone have you seen there's a new book by this doctor.
Mhm.
He's like a professor, and he came out and said that he uses heroin
Yeah, I
regularly.
saw that.
Like
Yeah.
he microdoses with heroin or
Yeah.
something. And I was like, that is so cool that he can like say that out loud because a lot of people, are like, all drugs are bad and everyone who uses drugs is an addict. And it's like,
Mhm.
that's not necessarily the
Yeah,
case.
it's like for anyone listening that hasn't seen this, it's like this clean cut, like younger college professor. And he's like, yeah, just casually on the weekends, like I'll just do a
Yeah,
little heroin.
right. Sounds fun. I mean, I know plenty of housewives in my
Yeah.
suburban neighborhood that will pop
Yeah.
a Vicodin in and have a glass of wine and call
Yeah.
that a night,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's very common. It's just we've kind of deemed like certain drugs to be worse than others. And obviously that's tied to the carceral system and the war on drugs and all that. And I just think that as someone who does practice abstinence, like I feel that it's kind of my obligation when I'm talking to other people who maybe are not as open to harm reduction to say, like, look, abstinence works for me. It's not going to work for everyone. And we all need to be respectful of everyone's paths to recovery, whatever that looks like for them.
Yeah. 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 And it's just it's an interesting deal, right? I mean, like number one, I think not to get into this too much, but what I do know is this, like you mentioned like the doctors, and like with Suboxone specifically, like the way it is supposed to be prescribed. And like this is just what I know because like I was literally in the study before the shit was even like on the market.
Right.
It's not supposed to be taken for years. Now, the bottom line is, and like I'm very grateful that like the way that it was prescribed to me, it was over like a couple week period and like it was done.
Yeah.
Now, the fact is that, you know what, like, and this is kind of what I like was really judgmental about, honestly, initially. I think, where I'm at now, it's like, like it says on the back of like the AA chips, to thine own self be true. If someone is, you know, okay with that themselves, like they're really okay with that, and like it's keeping them like from, ODing or doing something that is going to harm themselves or other, then I think that's what we're talking about, right? Like you mentioned seatbelts, bike helmets. Like these were all things that people were like, fuck, what we're doing right now is not working. Like
Right.
seatbelts aren't like that old. Like
No.
they haven't been around that long. And it's like,
Right.
what we've been doing driving around without seatbelts isn't working. And it's
Right.
like, I think the thing that I can't argue with is like what we have been doing in terms of trying to get people help from addiction has not been working for the
Yeah.
most part, right? And so it's like maybe it's not a perfect thing in my eyes or in someone else's. I mean, it's not the perfect thing right now because we have a lot of people, still dying
Yeah.
out there, unfortunately. But I think the point is that we've got to try something different, right? And I think, like, again, I have to go back to myself. Like, it kept me around long enough
Right.
to finally say, I think I'm okay without, without anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I really want to hit home on the fact that like harm reduction is not a foreign concept to us. I think
Hmm.
that just because it's in the context of people who use drugs, we feel uncomfortable because it's kind of a taboo topic.
Hmm. Hmm.
And like, what I've learned, especially from working and living in Philadelphia, is like people who are using drugs are deathly afraid of withdrawing. That
Yeah.
is why people continue. I mean, it can kill you to withdraw,
Hmm.
but also like, you know, I've had the shakes coming down off of something. Like, I'm sure it's 100 times worse when you're, using daily to a certain extent. But like, I'm thinking about the campaign that I was working on this summer. Like, Pennsylvania is one of the only states that does not have a statute that legalizes syringe service programs statewide. We have two, one in Pittsburgh and one in Philly. And there are people, especially in the public, who are not really connected to, the recovery community at all, who really have hurtful and hateful things to say about addicts, specifically, why are we giving them the tools that they need to, why are we giving them clean needles?
Hmm.
We're just, making them use more. We're keeping them addicted. Why do we have to Narcan these people if they OD? Like, that's their fault. Like, we shouldn't bring them back to life. And it's like,
Right.
these are human beings who have the autonomy of their bodies to do whatever they would like for whatever reason they would like.
Yeah.
And I think that a really important thing. There's a really important part of harm reduction that is meeting someone where they're at,
Hmm.
like they might not want to go into treatment. The city of Philadelphia is pissed because they send social workers down to Kensington all the time. And they're like, nobody takes us up on our offer to send them to treatment. And I'm like, of course they're not. First of all, they're sending cops down there.
Yeah.
Second of all, and nobody fucking likes cops.
Mm.
And second of all, like, people don't want to go to treatment. They want to keep using drugs because they like using drugs, like
Yeah.
I think that people need to realize like not all addicts are waiting for you to save them. Like we just have to make everything ready and accessible for when people do want to enter treatment. And some
Hmm.
might never, but if they do, it just has to be available. And we can't require people to be sober to live in public housing. We cannot, require people to not be using drugs, even smoking weed if we're going to drug test them for a job.
Right.
Like these are all things that like are just continually criminalizing people who use drugs, which is rooted in racism and, complete and utter disrespect for other human beings.
Yeah. 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 And so you're talking about like needle exchanges, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I'm here in Houston, Texas, and that's like a pretty rare thing in these parts for sure. Um, but the idea is that these people can come and exchange their needles. And I think, I mean, I hate to even say it like this, but like, because you're right, like these are human beings, and yeah, whether they're ready to stop or not, um, it's an economic issue too,
Yeah.
because when we've got these people that are getting sick and going into the hospitals and taking up spaces for other people that should be in there when they just could have gotten, I don't know how much a syringe costs, but it can't be that much compared to what a hospital stay costs.
Well, it's crazy because when I was working on this campaign, we had two different slide decks. One was for the Democrats, which was all about appealing to their humanity of like these people, need to have services available to them just like you would for any other medical condition. And
Mhm.
then for the Republicans, it's like, look how much money we are saving with a needle exchange.
Yeah.
Philadelphia's saved like $20 million or something
Yeah.
by exchanging needles because it cuts down on treatment for STIs and other diseases that are spread through dirty needles being
Mhm.
shared. It
Mhm.
cuts down on the amount of people, like you said, in the hospital. So yeah, it is an economic issue, but I think that you have to add that humanity back in
Sure.
because most people don't even like look at people on the street who are using because
Yeah.
they don't see them as other human beings.
Mhm. Mhm. So we're talking a lot about policy here.
Yeah, I'm a
Um,
nerd.
no, I mean, but look, it's important, right? And I mean, I think really this should be a bigger part of the conversation. So, I mean, if you could change like one thing, what would that be? Like, if you were in charge, what's changing tomorrow? Like, what is the one thing that is it like a decriminalization route? Is it legalization? Is it like what are we doing here?
I mean, it's hard to pick one, but I'm definitely proponent of legalizing over decriminalizing. That has worked in Portugal. Their overdose rates went down significantly when they legalized all drugs, including like heroin, cocaine, crack, all that. Like we can't just stop at marijuana. Like I know that it's probably not going to happen like very quickly because we just got weed legalized. So like
Mhm.
I don't know, but um, the thing that really comes to mind, like yes, there are things that I want to do in terms of like the ways in which we criminalize people who use drugs. Definitely that's important, but I
Yeah.
feel like if we're talking about like generally what I would do, what I would want to change for people who are seeking recovery and treatment is we need universal health care. The number one reason why people can't get into treatment when they're ready is because their insurance won't get there, won't allow them to stay longer than like you know 28 days, whatever it is. Maybe a lot of people need more than that. And the other thing is like um we don't have enough treatment centers. There is always like you have to call six places to find
Mhm.
one open bed. And I've sat on the phone with people doing this with them, and it is so frustrating to call each and every treatment center in your area and ask, like, do you have a bed? And they're like, no, sorry. And like there's months long waits. And that can't happen because in that time between someone actually wanting to go to treatment and actually getting there, they could go right back, OD, and die.
For sure.
So, it's expanding treatment, it's expanding the healthcare, system in this country so that people can go and get the treatment that they need when they're ready. And, I really would like to see some of those war on drugs era laws changed. Mandatory minimums infuriate me. You should not have to go to jail for 15 years just because you have a sugar packet worth of Coke on you. Like that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a lot of things, but I think definitely healthcare is going to be the number one thing
Mhm.
for addicts who want treatment because it's so impossible right now to get somewhere quick.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I do want to ask if you, and I think you've given us an idea, but if you could just tell us a little bit about what your recovery looks like today.
Yeah. So I just celebrated 3 years on December 5th of
Oh, that's
2020.
awesome.
Yeah.
Congrats.
So it's it's really kind of crazy because I think the first year I was like, thank God I'm still sober. The second year I had a great time. I went out dancing at a club for my sober birthday or whatever. And then this year I was in quarantine and I've been reflecting back and like my recovery, I love Zoom. I love that we've been able to have like meetings on Zoom. I have a really great home group. I try to go every night at 6. I'm really involved in my home group. I chair the meeting on Sundays right now, which is a great slot. And I have an amazing sponsor. Like I said, I've sponsored at least 5 other women at this point in my recovery, which has been some of the greatest gifts of my life. One of them was 15 years old,
Wow.
which was really amazing to be a part of their journey for as long as I was. So, I am involved in my program for sure, in terms of going to meetings and staying connected with other people in 12 steps. But, outside of that, like I am in therapy. I am a heavily medicated lady. I am definitely a proponent of, seeing a psychiatrist if you do need that. I've been on antidepressants since I was 16, and they really, they work for me. They don't work for everyone. I've had the same therapist since I was 16. Her name is Barbara, and I love her with my whole heart. And other than that, like really, I tried to get back into exercise. I had a back injury my last season of field hockey, and I was like, I'm not trying to mess this up again. So I didn't work out for a year, and I just started again a couple weeks ago. And now I'm like so tired every day. But like, just like little things, taking care of myself, like that's important in addition to the program and therapy. Like, just being nice to myself and like surrounding myself with people that make me feel good. That's really what my recovery is building a life that I feel comfortable in, because for so long I didn't feel comfortable in my life, in my own skin, and that's why I drank. So,
Mhm.
I think it's as important to have a program for me as it is to have people outside of that program supporting me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, got to have that support and that team, your recovery squad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I do want to ask if there's maybe one piece of advice that you'd like to share with the sober nation, whether it's someone that's trying to get sober, someone that's been sober for a little while, maybe struggling.
Yeah. There have been a couple times in my recovery where I was just kind of like, fuck this, like what's the point? Like I got sober to be happy, and like life still shows up and it still sucks sometimes. And like, I say all the time, life is just one big dumpster fire, and we all just got to find like whatever like we can salvage out of the fire. And, really, I think being able to laugh at yourself and being able to say like, I mean, I didn't drink today and I didn't kill myself, so it's a good day. Like it's that's really how simple it had to be for me. And so if I had to give any advice, it would be like life doesn't get easier just because you got sober, but you learn how to deal with life in a way that is productive when you get sober, because when I was drunk, I couldn't deal with anything. And now that I am sober, I'm learning how to react to situations that cause me extreme stress. I'm learning how to better take care of myself and my mental illness. And, I think at the end of the day, my sponsor always tells me like, this is a self-caring program. It's a self-learning program. And I came to AA to save my own ass. I didn't come to make friends. All the friends that I've made are just bonuses out of the whole experience. But first and foremost, I was there because I didn't know what to do with myself. And what I've learned is that underneath all the alcohol, there's a really, really scared little girl that's in me. And I need to coax her out and tell her that it's okay, that we are safe now. And, I do that in therapy and I do it in my program. And so being able to get to know yourself without the alcohol, that's the greatest gift that I've gotten. And I hope that other people can find that as well. But it
Hmm.
doesn't come quickly, and it doesn't come easily. So
Yeah.
patience is key in sobriety. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. Getting sober is doing a lot of shit that you don't want to do.
Hmm.
And at some point you end up starting to like it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
just keep pushing. If you're in a tough spot, keep pushing, stay sober, reach out to someone.
Well said. Well said. Awesome advice. So you can connect with Maggie on Instagram at Maggie X King, and you can find her book Pregame on Amazon. Thanks again for coming on the show, Maggie.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Be sure to check out the show notes for all the info from today's episode. Sober Nation FM is brought to you by Sobriety Engine. Sobriety Engine is a free online community of men and women supporting each other in their recovery. Visit sobrietyengine.com to join today. This show is also brought to you by Recover Health. If you're ready to get fit and start living a healthier lifestyle while supporting your sobriety, you can learn more about having me as your own personal fitness and nutrition coach at rcvrhealth.com. And again, whether you're listening to the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or watching on YouTube, please share this with your friends, follow, subscribe, and leave us a review. Nation, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.